Margot. One of the things that struck me this week, and I want to talk a little bit about the economic crisis that Jane has spelled out, but one of the things that struck me this week was the announcement that there's going to be an introduction of a lie detector test for people who are supposedly failing to declare as they're working and they're getting benefits. In other words, the so-called benefit cheats are going to have to submit to lie detectors. Now, it did make me wonder how we should extend this system if it's going to apply to people on benefits. Surely it shouldn't stop there. I mean, maybe it should apply to the police when they shoot unarmed people on the tubes in London. Maybe it should apply to the bankers when they say they're going to pass on the cuts in interest rates, and then they're now charging new people with new mortgages 6% interest when the bank rate is only 2% interest. Maybe it should apply to the government ministers who took us into the war in Iraq on the basis of a whole series of lies. And if we introduced it across the board, I don't think the people on benefits would be the people who will be found to be lying most of the time. I think we live in a society where it is endemic that we are not told about what is happening in our society. We're not told about the way in which the society really works. And when you look at this recession, when you look at this economic crisis, it strikes me that there are two ways you can approach it. You can approach it in terms of, this is, I think, the biggest economic crisis since the 1930s. I think it's a very, very serious thing. If you look at the unemployment figures, both in the United States, 500,000 people unemployed last month alone in the United States, the spending in the shops in the United States has fallen through the floor, that nobody has the money or has the confidence that they'll have the money in a few months' time in order to spend. There will be an estimated 2 million unemployed in this country by Christmas, and many more it's expected in the early part of next year. And every day now we're hearing about job losses, we're hearing about people on short-term time working, we're hearing about all those different kind of things. Now, it seems to me that that is the crisis, and that's the system under which we live, but of course it's very different who you are and how you are treated in this crisis. The banks, after all, many of these banks that are refusing to pass on the interest rate cuts are owned by the government, or part owned by the government. In other words, they're supposedly owned by us, by people who pay taxes in this country, yet we have absolutely no say over what goes on with whether they pay the money back or not. At the same time, when it comes to the question of welfare, when it comes to the questions of the poorest people, they're expected to suffer along with everybody else as a result of the crisis. And it seems to me there are two different responses here. As it said in Socialist Worker, one of the articles in Socialist Worker this week pointed out that if you're a banker, you are 500 billion times more likely to be bailed out than if you're a single mother. And it seems to me there's something wrong with that, really. That it seems that I've always thought that bringing up children is one of the most important and should be one of the most highly valued jobs in society. Actually, it's always one of the lowest valued jobs, even if you're paid to do it, because so many people do it for nothing, that means that even if you are paid, you're on a very low wage. But isn't there something wrong with a system which does this kind of thing? Isn't there something wrong with a system where we have supposedly one of the richest, well, we are one of the richest countries in the world, but there is not the money supposedly to deal with many of the most basic questions. And when we look how deep this recession is, you can see a number of kind of symbols of it. If you look at America, the big car companies are going to the government asking for a bailout. Now, the banks got 700 billion straight away. That was agreed within days. When General Motors and Chrysler and Ford go and ask for the same money, there's all sorts of strings attached to it. They're saying, oh, we can't bail out industry, we can't do any of these things, because this is about jobs for ordinary people. So you have this very different attitude. And when you think what this means, you know, General Motors and Ford and Chrysler survived the 1930s. They weren't threatened with bankruptcy, they weren't threatened with closure. Now we're talking about these companies possibly going under. If you look closer to home, what's happened to Woolworths country. And I always have fond memories of the Woolworths because it was my first job as a Saturday girl in the 1960s when I was 19 and 9 for working there while I was at school. And of course, Woolworths then was an institution. But again, it was famous because it had survived the Depression, and the theory was that actually Woolworths did well in times of economic crisis because it was a shop that the poor people went to and all those sorts of things. The fact that things are now under threat tells you the depth of the crisis and what the problem with it is. Now you've also got an amazing turnaround in what governments are saying. Jane referred to the fact that we've been told for 25, 30 years now that the free market is the only way that anything can work, that the only successful outcome to anything, whether it's education or health or any of these things, let alone industry and private enterprise, is the free market. Suddenly, they've ditched the free market. I mean, even George Bush, the man who now thinks that he was wrong about the Iraq War, a conclusion most of us came to 5 or 6 years ago, even George Bush said a couple of months ago that I'm a firm believer in the free market, but unfortunately we can't rely on the free market in this case. We have to put billions of dollars of state spending in order to save it. And we also see that maybe the beginning of the end of New Labour. After all, we've been told all these years we can't tax the rich. Suddenly, a couple of weeks ago, we're suddenly told that they are going to increase the tax rate for the top earners. Now, we shouldn't get too excited about this. This only applies to people who earn over £150,000 a year. I don't know if anybody here earns over £150,000 a year. You can put your hands up if you do. I know you're at a socialist worker meeting, but don't be frightened because all they'll do is ask you for a big donation to the collection at the end of the meeting. So please don't be shy. But if, as I guess, nobody here does earn £150,000 a year, that's not surprising because only 180,000 people in the whole country earn this money or earn above it, and they're only being asked to go from 40 pence top tax rate to 45 pence top tax rate. And in case it frightens them too much, they're being given 3 years to worry about how they're going to raise this extra money so they can pay a little bit more tax. And this, it seems to me, New Labour, they're now talking about taxing the rich, even though they're not really doing it. They're talking about giving money to business and nationalisation, all the things they were frightened of doing even a year ago. Alistair Darling's going around like a kind of drunken uncle at Christmas offering you a new dress, new lipstick, new iPod, anything you want. Don't worry, buy it now, pay later, because we've got to keep the economy going. This is the kind of way that they're talking about it. But of course, we have to look at what really is going on underneath. And see, capitalism is in a big crisis now, but it hasn't always been so. And even, as Jane said, although there's been a series of crises over the last decade or so, all of them, if you like, a warning of what was going to happen with this particular crisis, there have also been times when the economy has boomed and has boomed very substantially. And in a way, what's wrong with capitalism is not just that it is prone to crisis and it has to have crises, but even when it has a boom, it is a system into which inequality, poverty, all of these things are absolutely structured into the system. We live in a country, and this was true before this economic crisis started, we live in a country where 3.4 million children live in poverty. Despite all the talk about there's hard-working families and there's, obviously non-hard-working families, although how you can bring up a family and not be hard-working, I don't really understand. Despite all this talk, the majority of children in poverty will have parents who work because the working poor is one of the big features of this society. And therefore we have to look, we still have inequality, we still have war, we have wars going on in Afghanistan and Iraq which have led to millions of deaths, which have led to what they think will be famine in Afghanistan this year. We still have all these things